Hello, welcome to Defense Matters, where we are talking mostly IDP, all fantasy football, one of the many shows on the Big Three Network. I'm your host, Jordan Rains, at 50 Shades of Drunk on Twitter. I'm a senior writer at dynastynerds.com and co-host of the IDP 411 podcast, which is on expandtheboxscore.com. Guys and gals, today I have a great show for you. Going to be breaking down my redraft rankings for defensive line. So 2020 defensive line IDP draft rankings. I'm going to break down my first four tiers like I did my last show with the linebackers. And I'm going to go ahead and just start by first telling you about the scoring system, IDP 123. So in IDP 123 scoring, which is what these rankings are under, you have 1-point plays are quarterback hits and assisted tackles. 2-point plays are tackles for loss and solo tackles. 3-point plays are passes defended, forced fumbles, fumble recoveries, safeties, blocked kicks. And then your 6-point plays, which are basically your touchdowns of the defense, are sacks, interceptions, and IDP touchdowns. So that's going to be our scoring parameters for this show. And like I said, I'm going to break down my top, I believe my tier 4 ends with 37. So I'm going to break down my top 37 players with you for 2020 IDP defensive line rankings. And we're going to go ahead and start by defining as well what the tiers are. So we're going to have them broken into linemen kind of like this. We're going to have elite defensive linemen, great defensive linemen, and then serviceable defensive linemen. Elite defensive linemen or edge rushers is going to be tier 1 and tier 1 only. That's going to be high-end defensive linemen. And we'll go ahead and talk about those guys first. But what I'm looking for is, kind of like the outside linebacker show. I want them to meet 3 or more of these requirements: 12.5 or more sacks, 24 or more quarterback hits, 55 or more tackles, and 18 or more impact plays. So I think a guy is going to project out to hit 3 of these thresholds or 4, he is going to be ranked in my tier 1 linebacker or defensive lineman and edge. Some guys that aren't going to be in here that, were on the other show: Chandler Jones, TJ Watt, Shaq Barrett. I mean, some of those guys, aren't going to be played as a defensive lineman in all formats. So right now I'm just going down my Fantasy Pros rankings. In season, I will cater more to the sleeper app. So I will cover, Chandler Jones won't probably be in my linebacker ranking show during the season. He'll be on my defensive line rankings. But for the purposes of this show, he was on the linebacker show because that's how Fantasy Pros kind of forced me to rank him this season. So I'm going to go ahead and start tier 1. My number 1 overall guy is Danielle Hunter from the Minnesota Vikings. Number 2, Myles Garrett from the Cleveland Browns. Number 3, Nick Bosa, San Francisco 49ers. Number 4, Joey Bosa, LA Chargers. 5, J.J. Watt. 6, Aaron Donald, LA Rams. And 7, Cameron Jordan. That's my tier 1 defensive lineman, edge rusher guys for the season. These are high-end defensive lineman 1. I'm projecting these guys to get, meet these 3 or more of these thresholds: 12.5 or more sacks, 24 or more quarterback hits, 55 or more tackles, and 18 or more impact plays. Danielle Hunter, right off the bat, he's been averaging 70 tackles the last 2 seasons, basically. So he crushes that. 14.5 tackles, crushes that. And then he is disruptive. He does not have a super high number of impact plays. He does not get a lot of pass deflections, but his tackles for loss, his quarterback hits, and his sacks are so high, he easily is number 1 overall. I will say there's a case to be made to maybe put a couple other guys ahead of him, but the consistency of Danielle Hunter right now, year to year, the past 2 seasons, it's just silly to move him. Number 2, Myles Garrett. He had the unfortunate, mishap this year. He didn't get to play the full season, but in 10 games, he had 10 sacks, 29.5 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, 18 quarterback hits. I mean, he was being super disruptive. He had 2 forced fumbles as well. All that in just 10 games. He was pacing for to crush his season before that. He had 13.5 in 16 games. So, I mean, he was right on the heels of destroying those numbers. So, he looks better than ever. He says, he hasn't been losing any, getting out of shape, anything like that. I mean, he's ready to play. So he's definitely a guy that is a tier 1 defensive lineman. Nick Bosa, Joey Bosa, the Bosa brothers are great pass rushers. Joey has consistently been a double-digit tackle or sack producer, high tackles for loss. I believe he was one of the tackle for loss leaders this last season. Yeah, he had third most tackles for loss in 2019 with 18 tackles for loss. Nick right on his tails with 16. So they're crushing in the impact play department without even going into the other things that they do for your teams. Joey Bosa does not get a lot of pass deflections. I believe he has 3 over a 4-year career. And like I said earlier, Danielle Hunter does not have a lot of pass deflections. So that's the only real in this tier. Those guys are the guys that can get knocked. Because they do not do a lot in the pass deflection area. Nick Bosa, for instance, he's already got 2, and he's only been in the league for a season, and 2 or 3. And Joey, he's been, like I said, been in the league for 4 or 5 years. He's only got 3, so he's just not focusing on that. JJ Watt, we know what JJ Watt is. He does everything. I mean, there are no holes in JJ Watt's game. Injury concerns are the only reason people would not have him in this tier. We're just assuming 16 games for everybody when you're ranking, in my opinion. You kind of have to. I mean, maybe you can bake in everybody misses a game, but I mean, you have to bake that in for everybody because all things being equal. So he's a tier 1 guy. Aaron Donald, I mean, again, defensive player of the year, all pro basically every season of his career. He's averaging 20 tackles for loss a season, guys. He was the tackle for loss leader this year and last year at 20 this year. That's what he averages. If you go back and look at his career, he's averaged 20 tackles for loss a season, which is incredible. Talk about an impact play. It's a behind the line of scrimmage. The offense is moving backwards. He does this 20 times a year. I mean, that's big. That's big. Anybody will tell you that's big. And then I got Cameron Jordan in here. Like I said, he's number 7. Cameron Jordan, he does it all. He was sack leader this year. He was 3rd in the sacks this year. He was ahead of Danielle Hunter, ahead of TJ Watt, ahead of Zadarius Smith, ahead of Aaron Donald, only behind Shaq Barrett and Chandler Jones. So he got the sacks this year. Every year he gets pass deflections. He's great at that. That's one of the things I love about him. 3 this year, 6 the year before, 11 year before. Those are impact plays. Those are 3-point plays in IDP 1, 2, 3 scoring. So 2 pass deflections equals a sack, all things being equal. So guys that can make up for not getting high sack numbers, can make up for it in other ways on the field. But Cameron Jordan does it all. He deserves to be a tier 1 defensive lineman. He deserves to be treated like one. And like I said, he is one of my tier 1 defensive linemen. These guys are elite defensive linemen 1. I believe that these guys are going to be defensive linemen, 1s this year, DE 1s, edge 1s, whatever you want to call them. I believe they're going to meet these thresholds that need to be met. So they're my lock 1s. Now the next tier, the next is actually definition I have is great defensive lineman. Now this is tier 2 and tier 3. So you're going to have low end defensive linemen 1s and then high end defensive linemen 2s is how I'm viewing this next group of guys. I call them great defensive linemen. There are 2 tiers. I'll go ahead and break down tier 2 for you really fast. Tier 2, you have Cameron Hayward, Pittsburgh, Chase Young at 9, Washington, rookie. 10, DeMarcus Lawrence, Dallas Cowboys. 11, Justin Houston, Indianapolis Colts. 12, Carlos Dunlap. 13, DeForest Buckner, just moved to Indianapolis Colts. 14, Chris Jones, Kansas City Chiefs. 15, Chandler Jones, Atlanta Falcons now. 16, Sam Hubbard, Cincinnati Bengals. 17, Josh Allen, Jacksonville Jaguars. 18, Frank Clark, Kansas City Chiefs. And 19, you have Grady Jarrett. Excuse me. That's my tier 2. And, I'm projecting these guys to get right around 10. The tier that I'm talking about, the great defensive lineman, the requirements, I'll read them back to you. Sorry, guys. 10 or more sacks, 18 or more quarterback hits, 45 or more tackles, and then 15 or more impact plays. 3 of those or more need to be met. So that's where you're kind of getting these guys that you're not super locking in. I know that Carlos Dunlap can have more than 10 sacks, but I don't know if I'm projecting him to do that. I know Dante Fowler could have more than 10 sacks, but I'm not sure that I can project him to do that. Same, Josh Allen could. That's kind of my thought process, when it comes to sacks. Tackles, again, these 45, it's like that's really good. That's a good threshold to hit. If you can get me 45 tackles, that's great. Some of these guys, Sam Hubbard and Cameron Jordan, they both had massive tackle numbers, so I know they're going to hit that. but they were both under 11, under 10 sack, that 10 sack threshold. So there are ups and downs to these players. These guys aren't the all around whole package like some of the other guys are. Still could be played as low end ones, high end defensive linemen too. And I'm going to go ahead and get into my tier 3. Now, I said that these guys could be, these are also great defensive linemen, and I'm kind of projecting them the same way, but these are players I'm less confident in, even so than that other, tier 2. So tier 2 and 3 both fall into this great defensive lineman tier, but tier 3 are guys I'm less confident in. I'll go ahead and read those off to you. At 20, we have Max Crosby, Las Vegas Raiders. 21, Robert Quinn, Chicago. 22, Eric Armstead. 23, Trey Flowers. 24, Yannick Ngakoue. 25, Jason Pierre-Paul, Tampa Bay. 26, D Ford, San Francisco. 27, Melvin Ingram, LA Chargers. 28, Brian Burns, Carolina Panthers. 29, Montez Sweat, Washington Redskins. And 30, Calais Campbell, Baltimore Ravens. So that's 2 tiers, but both these tiers are what I'm qualifying as great defensive linemen. I have a lot of faith in this upper tier. Cameron Jordan is an elite player. Chase Young is supposed to be an elite player. We've seen DeMarcus Lawrence be an elite player. DeForest Buckner, one of the most solid floors in the league, averaging over 60 tackles a season. Chris Jones lives behind the line of scrimmage. All of these guys can get you points in a lot of different ways. And I'm very confident in them as low-end ones. I mean, I would be happy to have Frank Clark as my number 18 defensive lineman. He's in tier 2. I'd be happy with Frank Clark to consider him a low-end one. He's ranked as a 2, but, in IDP, you can kind of blend these. Sometimes you really do have ties. These are kind of – this tier represents players that will score similarly. A couple of guys I do want to highlight in tier 2 are Josh Allen. So we have rookie Josh Allen. We lose Calais Campbell. Led all rookies last year with 10.5 sacks. Played a pretty low number of snaps, though. Only 634. Nick Bosa played more snaps. Max Crosby played more snaps. Montez Sweat all played more snaps. But Josh Allen got the sacks. 11 tackles for loss, 23 quarterback hits. And he only started 4 games compared to a player like Montez Sweat, who was in that next tier. Started all games. So Josh Allen, he's got the talent, but we have a little bit of, movement. We don't know if Yannick's going to play. That's why Yannick is in tier 3 and not tier 2. That's why Calais Campbell's in tier 3 and not tier 2. A little movement, a little unsurety. So I'm highlighting this just to kind of give you an idea of while I do have Yannick at 24 and Calais Campbell at 30, that does not mean for a second that I don't believe that they could move up and finish as a high end 2, maybe in even 18, 19. You know what I mean? And maybe even get to a 1 status. But this tier is kind of a very fluid area for me, tier 2 and tier 3. Tier 3, guys I want to highlight, Max Crosby. Just a little bit less faith in Max Crosby than Nick Bosa and Josh Allen because, frankly, it took him a little while to get on the field. The talent's obviously there, but what are we not seeing that made it to where it took 3 or 4 weeks for them to notice him? And he did have a lot of his production in 1 game. So I'm a little less confident in him than I am in Josh Allen. Another guy I want to highlight in this tier, Jason Pierre-Paul. Now, Jason Pierre-Paul was pacing essentially to have a similar season to Myles Garrett last year. Let me see if I can pull that up real fast. He played in 10 games, only started 8.5 sacks. So he had a sack in every game he started. 16 quarterback hits, again, just in 10 games. Let's compare that to Myles Garrett. 18 in 10 games, 10 sacks in 10 games. So those numbers are very comparable. Myles Garrett with 11 tackles for loss in 10 games. Jason Pierre-Paul with 9. Getting their points in different ways, but pacing each other. Now, Jason Pierre-Paul has a kind of a legendary injury situation. He kind of if there was a player that's just injury prone and not even playing football, it's Jason Pierre-Paul. that's why he falls down in this category for me. And there's other guys on this line that are going to eat. Ndamukong Suh, Vita Vea, Shaq Barrett, most notably. Also Levante David and Devin White. So there's a little more competition for Jason Pierre-Paul than there is for Myles Garrett. But that's another example of a player that would not shock me that is in tier 3 that could jump up very easily and be finished in that tier 2, which is 8 through 19. So that's the last player I want to highlight in tier 3 before I read off tier 4, which is a little bit smaller of a tier, is Montez Sweat. I wrote a couple articles on dynastynerds.com, which you guys go check out. I'll leave a link below in the description of this, but it was recapping the rookies, and it was recapping Montez Sweat, and it was recapping Nick Bosa, and it was recapping Josh Allen. And it's interesting, Montez Sweat started all 16 games. He was thrown to the fire. Didn't lead the rookies in sacks, but he did lead them in tackles. He had 50 tackles, which was more than Crosby, more than Bosa, more than Allen. So he did pull that off. And you have to remember he is playing on a very talented line. There are a lot of guys there that can get stuff done. Daron Payne, Matt Ioannidis, Jonathan Allen, now Chase Young, who I do have in my tier 2. But Montez Sweat is another player who could take a big jump this year. And while he is in tier 3, don't be surprised. He could be a tier 2 guy up there with Chase Young, who's also in tier 2 for me this year. And, these are all players that I think you can play as twos, high-end 2s, low-end 1s. You might want to load up on a couple if you do not get one of the higher-end guys, one of my tier 1 guys. Just, kind of like lottery picks, hope, if you have 3 or 4 or 5 of these guys, when one of them does hit, you won't have had to pay up. Jason Pierre-Paul, perfect example, pacing with Myles Garrett points-wise. So I'm going to go ahead and get to my tier 4 defensive linemen. So this is my tier 4. This is where we go to what I call serviceable defensive linemen. And honestly, this tier could be massive. I'm only going to highlight a few guys in this tier, but it could go much deeper than that. But for the sake of time, I don't want you guys to spend your whole lives, listening to this. I want you to be able to digest this information. Go to the site, expand the box score, check it out, because my rankings do change. They are fluid, as new information's coming. I actually changed one of my rankings on the last show as I was looking at Zadarius Smith. So as I'm seeing new things, I am moving guys around, and I'm staying fluid and I'm paying attention. But I want to highlight some of the main guys that I'm looking at in tier 4. These are low-end 2s, DL3s, and kind of streamers. But in this area, some guys I'm really looking at is at 30, Chase Winovich, 32, Kenny Clark, 33, Larry Ogunjobi, 34, Marcus Golden, 35, Ed Oliver, 36, Marcus Davenport, New Orleans, and then 37, Jonathan Allen, Washington Redskins. These guys, Chase Winovich, I'll start with him. Did not play a lot of snaps last year, but when he was on the field, he was scoring points. He was getting, he had 5 sacks. Didn't start any games last year, but so many players are opting out with COVID on the Patriots. There's almost no world where Chase Winovich does not see a massive increase in snaps. Not just an increase, like a big one. And if they schemed it up to where he got as much done as he did last year, pay attention. He's tier 4, but he's a guy that in a lot of my dynasty leagues, I've been trying to add to the end of my benches. Kenny Clark, one of the better interior rushers up in Green Bay, was a little bit banged up this last year, so wasn't as disruptive as he was the year before, but still super young and a lot of upside there. He's already shown himself to be a capable pass rusher from the interior, and I think if he gets a big season this year, he's going to get a lot more kind of recognition in IDP and around the league. So in your DT-specific leagues too, he's a guy that a lot of people are, you're passing on him for your sexier names like your DeForest Buckners, your Grady Jarrett's. You can wait around and get Kenny Clark probably a little later than you should be able to. Larry Ogunjobi is another name right after him that I love in defensive tackle-specific leagues, but then 2 away from him, Ed Oliver. These are guys in a DL league on Sleeper that I'm comfortable with, as my DL3s, and that's kind of where I have them ranked, by the ranking guidelines. These are low-end 2s, DL3s, and streamers, and I don't know if I read these off, but they're, 7 sacks or more is the threshold, 13 or more quarterback hits, 35 or more tackles, and 12 or more impact plays. That's kind of my threshold to reach or be considered in this, and the guys that I would play that each and every week, kind of knowing, okay, this is kind of where their season is going to go. So I'm going to go ahead and read off that tier one more time for you. Tier 4, 31, Chase Winovich. 32, Kenny Clark. 33, Larry Ogunjobi. 34, Marcus Golden. 35, Ed Oliver. 36, Marcus Davenport. And 37, Josh Allen. That's it, guys. Like, that's just my thoughts right there. That's kind of my process of how I've ranked these guys out. Go to expandtheboxscore.com. You can see my full rankings. They go all the way to 63 defensive line players right now that I think are going to be IDP relevant, most IDP relevant. So that link will be in the description of this episode. I will put the link to my Dynasty Nerds article series over the rookie rushers, because there were a lot of guys that were rookies in 2019 that are on in these tiers of playable players this year. And in Dynasty, you should definitely be interested, because you'll notice there was only one player that even from this 2020 class that made it onto this list, and that was Chase Young. So last year was the year to get an edge rusher, or an edge guy, or a defensive line guy in your Dynasty leagues. 2019, go get them now still before the blow up happens, because these guys are legit. Like I said, Josh Allen, Max Crosby, Nick Bosa, all three guys that are in my first three tiers. I mean, you're going to be able to play them every week. You're going to want to play them every week. And then you get down and you get Brian Burns. I mentioned him. I didn't even highlight Brian Burns, but check out the article on Dynasty Nerds. Brian Burns is highlighted. Montez Sweat's highlighted. Chase Winovich, Ed Oliver. These are guys, these are names you're going to be hearing in IDP Fantasy Football for many years to come. So go check that out. And yeah, appreciate the Big 3 Network. Appreciate Expand the Box Score. You guys can listen to our other show, the IDP 411, which is with my man Jared and my man Steve. We rock out over there. But yeah, my next show that I'll post will be my defensive back rankings for 2020. I'll give you guys my first 3 or 4 tiers on those. And then, yeah, we'll be back again soon. Have a good one.